This is Duke University.
Good evening, everyone. If there's any overflow, we have the event webcasted in room 3037 if you guys need a seat. Welcome to the 10th Annual ESQ Career Symposium. My name is Spencer Young, and I'm one of the co-presidents of the Business Law Society. And on behalf of the entire Business Law Society, would like to thank you all for coming out tonight. This year's symposium includes over 40 panelists from across the country. Please join me in giving a round of applause for all of our panelists without whom this event would not be possible. This is an invaluable opportunity for Duke students to learn about business law and the careers that they would like to go into. And would just like to thank you all for traveling all the way down here to Durham and for spending your Friday nights and Saturdays with us, helping your fellow Duke students. This is great. Thank you. Another thanks to the Career and Professional Development Center and the Office of Alumni and Development. We're also grateful to our wonderful sponsors, Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, Sullivan & Cromwell, and Paul Hastings, who have generously supported this event. Should any of you have questions throughout the weekend, please don't hesitate to ask me, Keegan, or Andrew. And thanks again for coming. We hope you enjoy this year's ESQ. Thank you. Please welcome Keegan.
Thank you, Spencer. Good evening, everyone, and again, welcome to ESQ. My name is Keegan Drake, and I am one of the co-presidents of the Business Law Society, as well as one of the co-organizers of this symposium. Tonight, it is my honor to introduce Professor Jim Cox, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. Professor Cox joined Duke's law faculty in 1979. He has worked on many legislative items, the best part of which was when some became law, and 6 books, the best part of which is that all have annual supplements. This semester, Professor Cox teaches business associations and securities regulation. Having been on the business end of one of his cold calls, I take special joy in asking him to come up here to speak to you all tonight. Please help me welcome him.
We're particularly lucky tonight because one of the individuals who was recruited to be here is one of the founding members. Before I talk about Dan, I'll talk a little bit about Chris. Chris Vazika's, but I must say that the group, the Business Law Society, has improved itself. They used to call this the smoker. And I told them when they were going to do that that sounds like a bunch of guys in a fraternity or something, and you probably ought to be a little bit more neutral than that. So anyway, the Business Law Society has really moved along quite a lot and rapidly over time, and the law school is much better for it. And thanks to everybody for contributing to that this year and years in the past and years in the future, no doubt. So the bouncy bio for Dan Scheinman describes him in the first several paragraphs as an investor. And I read that and I sort of thought, you know, this is a masterpiece of understatement because Dan was an investor before he came to law school. Because how is it that somebody at the time that when you went to college in the dark ages, Dan, comes out of college with a mastery of Mandarin Chinese, and at the same time of picking that up, does extremely well at your college. You were in the Student Senate, if I remember correctly, as well. Lots of other activities. But all along, what he was doing is what I think is the message that we repeatedly try to tell our students here, and that is, you know, invest in yourself and act like an investor. Look for opportunities, assess them, take calculated risks, and you don't stop taking those risks when you're 20. You don't stop taking those risks when you're 40. And you don't stop taking those risks, at least I like to think, when you're in your 60s. You just keep doing it. And you follow that career path, and you'll be justly rewarded, as all wise investments do. And Dan's career has been that way. So remember our conversation about is it going to be New York? Is it going to be Palo Alto? Is it true that this is just an outpost there? I don't know what you were doing when you were in Burlingame rather, but you should have known something about Palo Alto being sort of the mecca for startups, and thought that, well, you know, you go west, young man. And that you did, and part of your investing out there was thinking a little bit about what are my endowments and where can they be best deployed, and then shopping around. And there was this one ad, if I remember correctly, in the newspaper looking for somebody who could become counsel for a almost startup company at that point. It had a strange name that you usually would have thought about when you were eating someplace at a community restaurant called Cisco. But it wasn't Cisco Foods, it was Cisco Electronics. And you went there on the legal staff, became, in record time, the general counsel, and not just became general counsel of Cisco. You were the innovative Cisco. I went to lots and lots of meetings where people were talking about how Cisco was doing novel things in terms of managing its legal business on the outside, and always looking for the additional edge. And like any good general counsel, Dan continued to invest in himself, learning more about the company, and become a spokesperson that at some point switches get pretty boring and pretty limited, and electronic switches. And so it was no surprise that, I guess about 18 years ago, that you switched out of the general counsel's office and headed up Cisco's vast operation, had this huge storehouse of cash and a need to diversify, and started heading up their operations and going back where the new frontier was, which was China and the Far East. And investing there. And the rest is just like the beginning, all history. The investor's still there. It is a quality that I just want to remind everybody here. We all either have a Duke degree or we're going to get a Duke degree. And that's the following, is that something we've always stressed is to always act like an investor. Assess what the opportunities are, look what your endowments are, take the risks. And if you've done that enough times, you always have a nice reservoir of talent to fall back on in the event it doesn't work out. But generally, it works out very well, and you grow in the process. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our alumnus, my friend, Dan Scheinman. Yeah.
I want to thank Professor Cox for doing a much better job of summarizing what I was going to say than I was, so thank you and good night. It's been a real privilege. But indeed, it's an honor to be here. Groucho Marx said famously, he wouldn't want to belong to any club which would have him as a member. He wasn't aware of this club. The Duke Club has been a fantastic and wonderful part of my life and my career, and it's a great honor and privilege to be back here and talking to all of you. This is a really special and magical place, and as the years go on, I realized more and more how so it was. I met some of my best friends and great mentors here, and people who are really involved in my life today, and people who have been an enormous friend to my family and been great supporters of me. And it's also been a place where I feel very proud every day because of what you all do to be affiliated with this great institution. Right? Every time I see Professor Cox in the newspaper, I feel it makes me feel proud. When I see the achievements that all of you have attained and all of you will attain, I feel very happy. I also want to thank the students for inviting me here today. It really is great to get to know these guys, and I realize the future is in good hands, and that all of us who have a degree don't need to worry about the equity in our degree. Everything is going to be fine. Dean Levy as well for inviting me out here. I think Dean Levy has done a great job of leading and following in the footsteps of so many other great deans that have helped take this law school. I mean, the building that has gone on here is quite frankly incredible, and to have taken this law school from a place which was possibly the ugliest building on campus to something much better. I want to thank Jeff Coates as well in development for spending the time and effort to make sure we did this right, and I really appreciate it. And I have so many old friends and classmates here, and I'm really appreciative of all of them for showing up and for coming. One thing that I want to tell you is generally I am not a reader of things, but because this really mattered to me, I wrote out what I want to say. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading, a little bit of talking. Now, I realized, I told my wife, I said, I've written this out because I want to make sure I get the words right and I'm not tripping over myself. And she said, you realize that the last time most of these people have had a story read to them was when they were probably 10 and someone was trying to put them to sleep. So I'm going to try and avoid doing that. If I get to that point, if in the back deck people start, nodding their head, then I know it's problematic. But I'm going to go on for about 20 minutes and I'm going to talk a lot about risk. And what I really want to talk today is about my life and risk. And why it is that I think in this economy that we don't necessarily think about risk in the right way. That risk, the way that we've traditionally thought about it, particularly in the law school, might not be the way that we should think about risk, and opportunity might be slightly different. And my pitch to you at the end of the day, I hope, is going to be one where I hope I stimulate some things. For those of you who are already sort of in the entrepreneurial economy, I know I'm preaching to the choir. But for the rest of you, I hope that I stimulate something. And I want to leave 10 minutes or so for Q&A, and I feel free to ask questions, and I hope I can be useful to all of you. So with that, we begin. The attitude of risk in my generation was really summed up by my interaction with a would-be girlfriend of mine in college named Lisa, who I hope is not watching the webcast of this. But one day, to be honest, I wasn't as sold on her as she presented, but one day she came to me in the undergraduate library, and she said, bad news. And I said, for who? She said, for you. I said, okay. And she said, I've decided to go with a dentist in New Jersey. The guy actually was a dental student, but I've gone with him because I think he's the safer bet. And I said, really, right? Give me details. And she said, you're a bit odd, and it could go either way. So if nothing else, my pitch tonight is my rebuttal to Lisa, right? And a vote to go with the weird and go with the bit odd. Today in the world, I think the definition of risk has completely inverted, right? And my view is that what people think of as the safe choice may not be the safe choice, right? Professor Cox began by talking about the decision, which I agonized about 25 years ago, more or less. Actually, I should lie about that. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, to go to Palo Alto, which I spent agonizing. Palo Alto, New York, Palo Alto, New York, Palo Alto, New York, right? Blaine was probably driven crazy by this. But in retrospect, it's a complete no-brainer, right? Here, the greatest economic boom in history was going to happen within a 30-mile radius, with trillions of dollars of wealth being created, with bazillion companies arising out of nothing, with legal opportunity and other opportunity that would never have existed for me had I gone to a more traditional place, right? And yet, right, it was a hard choice because I didn't understand the definition of risk, right? And today what I think has happened, and again, I hope I can pitch this, and I hope without being offensive to all the sponsors of this conference, but I do believe that there's a lot of risk that's building up in traditional institutions, right? And that these institutions are taking on risk, and that they, in many ways, may be a lot more risk-filled, right? Kodak is a place where there was a lot more risk than the 10-person startup in Palo Alto that has opportunity ahead of it, right? The basic thing that I believe, as Professor Cox said even more eloquently than I'm going to, is that the answer to all of this is that we have to prepare ourselves to live in the equity economy, right? And the equity economy is not only about how much do I get, but it's about the investment we make in ourselves and how much do we become. And if I leave you with nothing else tonight, it's that I want all of you to think about, and I'll give you detail about all of this, but I want you to think about your equity and your personal equity as you go through your career and your personal definition of risk. And I believe in doing that, you're going to see more opportunity and have the opportunity to have a lot more fun and to go a lot farther. I'm also a believer that the legal skill set is exceptionally valuable, right? The things that you learn in this magical building are actually very useful, right? And throughout my career, time and time again, and I would say that I probably am not the finest specimen of lawyer to emerge from this building, but time and time again, I have seen where the ability to analyze, the ability to negotiate, and the ability to understand the detail is exceptionally valuable in a world that a lot of people go fast and don't pay attention to those things. And those same skill sets are what have enabled me to have a lot of opportunity. And so I think the legal degree is as important or more important in today's world than it ever has been. Okay. So there's been a problem that has bugged me for a long period of time, and it's a problem Dean Levy knows. I used to talk about this with the former dean of Stanford, Kathleen Sullivan, who is a very brilliant and wise leader. And on average, we would say that the people who are in the law school probably have higher test scores, higher grades than our comrades next door in the business school, right? But the problem is that in general, they seem to end up happier, richer, right, with a lot less angst than we do. Why, right? Brilliantly, I posed this question to my wife, who was an MBA, and she wanted me to make clear that that didn't happen in our house, right? That it was the right order occurred. But you know, so why is it, and what is it? And I think it begins, you know, almost in the beginning of things, which is that we end up a lot like looking at risk, a lot like Lisa did, right? 30 years ago. And I think that what we do is we tend to look at risk in the wrong way. And that I think if we look at risk in a more holistic sense, it's going to lead for the opportunity for all of us to see that there's bigger opportunity that's there, right? I think back a lot to 25 years ago when I was here, and I was still doing a losing battle with the typewriter. And I spent a lot of time with my classmates, of course, talking about what did we want to be when we grew up. And we'd have the discussion over and over again, and there was a resounding sameness, right, to the middle of opinion in my group. And people wanted to go to big cities, to big law firms, big government, right? And if there was a strategy, it was sort of do that and keep your options open, right? And that was sort of I think the extent of strategy that we had, right? And we didn't understand what was going on, and we didn't see the larger world, right? But today, in an era when law firms aren't growing, and the opportunities inside law firms may be less attractive when it's 10 years to become a partner, and when your odds of becoming a partner are as low as they are, I think taking that path without an exit plan is building risk, right? And that you, by not having a bigger plan, you run the risk of not having a good outcome, right? Intuitively, when I was going through this, I had a lot of trouble getting excited about those options. I didn't see myself as being necessarily the person who was going to be successful in big law firm, big city, big government. And the more interviewing options I went on, the more I determined that I was probably right. I took my first weird step, thankfully to Dean Carrington, who sent me to China for a year, and I went to Hong Kong after I graduated. And as Professor Cox said, when I announced I was going to Palo Alto, I got a pat on the back from him, but a little bit of the odd look from others, right, who said, this is really a high beta choice and a little odd again. But again, where I ended up there, it became immediately apparent that we were living in a world where the new economy was being born, and that all of a sudden, almost by accident and because of good weather, I'd ended up in the place of enormous economic transition. Companies that nobody had heard of were being created in the blink of an eye, and what we were seeing was that institutions that no one could have imagined not only were created, but were growing at paces that no one had seen before, right? And the big question that I found myself into was a question of not could I make it, but the question was could I scale to see the size of the opportunity that was in front of me, right? When I was telling the story this morning, but I was at a law firm and we had misaligned metrics. They had wanted me to be able to spell. I had wanted to be able to prove I was bringing in business, keeping clients happy. We had misalignment of our metrics and our goals, right? And so it was clear that either one side or the other was going to win, and most likely I knew it wasn't going to be me, so I was going to be looking for something. And when I began at Cisco, the first question that I was asked was, this is a company that had about $80 million in sales. And they said, what do you think what's your vision as to what $1 billion legal department looks like, right? What do you believe how would you scale this to $1 billion, right? Given my other career option was unemployment, maybe panhandling on the street, I wasn't sure, right? I thought, I need to have a vision, right? And that question of how do you scale this is exactly the same question that every day is what I spend my time dealing with, and I spent my time dealing with basically for the last 20 years, right? And being able to answer that question and to understand the answer to that question and having an answer to that question, right, is the thing that differentiates you in a growth economy. Now, I wish I could tell you I was some sort of visionary at 24, and that I knew, right? I would have bought a lot more Apple stock, of course. I would have bought a lot more Cisco stock, right? I would have sold at the right time. But for sure, I knew that you could see the impact when you were in China that the technology industry was beginning to have, right? I can still remember when HP came to China in 1986 and the reception that they got, it was as if, water had been first delivered or something. It was really an incredible thing, and that the hope that this thing inspired, and I thought this industry can have such a massive impact on the world, right? And I too believe that, as a dyed-in-the-wool contrarian, that I always trusted the small institutions over the big, right? And that small seemed to me to be a place that you could actually have opportunity and be judged by the content of what you do as opposed to other things. And the other thing at Cisco that also got me excited was that I was told that we were going to take on IBM, and that my whole legal career, my whole 3-year legal career, we had always been battling with IBM on behalf of our clients and always losing. And so the opportunity to take on this giant IBM with 800 people in an office in East Palo Alto struck me as the greatest opportunity and a great adventure for life, right? Today, I'm slightly better at predicting the future, right? Although what hasn't changed is that our economy is still in the early innings of a massive transformation. We're moving to a world where we're shifting from industrial to digital, right? Where the underlying thesis of our whole economy is beginning to change. And unlike the last 20 years when a rising tide lifted all boats and helped all things, I think that we're going to see in the next 20 years a massive structural change in the economy, which is unleashed by everything becoming digital, right? And I still think that we've underrated where that is and how early we are in all that. Today, IT has moved from something that was impacting the IT department to something that's transforming the mainstream economy, right? You look at Kodak, right? It's replaced by an app on this supercomputer we call our phone, right? We have today the appization of our entire economy, and it's happening within the blink of an eye. And make no mistake, right? We as technology companies are subject to the same disruptions that are caused by the waves of innovation, right? Bill Gates was at Cisco once, and somebody asked him, why do you keep so much cash? And I was expecting the answer to be, because I can. But he actually had a more thoughtful answer, which is that he said, I remember when I couldn't make payroll, and there's going to be a time in the future when I'm not going to be able to make payroll at some point, when things are going to get tough. And I want to have that much cash that I can pay every employee for 3 years, right? At Cisco, we went from the largest company in the planet for 7 seconds in 2000 to being a legacy company in 10 years, right? The transition from equity to cash happened in an incredible speed, right? And so it means that the definition of risk, even within our industry, keeps changing, right? I spent the last 3 years trying to sell software to the media business, and there's no industry, quite frankly, that is a better example of sort of the shifting transition of risk, right? If you're running an entertainment company in LA or New York and you're selling your bundle of content basically to the cable company, you have this business model that's worked for 100 years, right? You sell a bundle, the consumer pays, and everything's fabulous, right? But this new thing called the internet is sort of a bother to you, or the digital distribution, right? And you try taking the same content and you put it on the internet and you only get dimes for what people pay you dollars for on cable TV. But the reality is you're in a cash economy, and you're judged not by how much you own of the stock, but what how much cash you bring in, and you're meeting your revenue targets, and everything's quite fine, seemingly. And sadly, unfortunately, all these people are male, so I have to say, for him, he's starting to take enormous risk, right? Because what he's doing is saying, I'm going to ignore all this stuff, and I'm going to keep going and keep generating my cash, right? And I was with a studio head on a lot in LA, and the only thing that would make it more perfect is if he was smoking a cigar. And he started to say, I don't really want to spend a lot of time with you and the technology guys. He goes, I get to spend time with models and actresses. Why would I want to spend time with you? Point taken. But I said, at some point, this thing is going to happen. And he said to me, look, you know what this problem is? I said, what? He said, the next guy's problem, right? And I think too often in our world, we think about the economy that way. And as opposed to saying, hey, it's your opportunity, not the next guy's problem, right? Meanwhile, out there, some 5 guys are in a garage trying to figure out how to produce content a la carte for a new world, right? But he to me, was an adult version of Lisa, right? Saying, hey, I kind of like the dentist in New Jersey, in this case, the cable company, right? And I don't want to change because it threatens me, right? I had one of my classmates was calling me the other day, and he was talking about his kids, and he was saying, I'm really worried about what job they're going to have when they graduate. And I said, have they done anything to prepare themselves for living in the new world? Have they gone to entrepreneurship stuff? Have they made efforts to go do these things? And He said, no, because I'm a little worried that, these things sound like it's not really academic. It's a little bit beneath where they are. And I'm like, the reality is this is our world, right? And this is the world we're going to live in, is we're going to be working in this digital world. It's not something we should be afraid of. It's not just for engineers. It's not just for people who are, in that space. It's a world where we all have to invest. And I told him, I think by betting on the old stuff, his kids end up taking a lot more risk in their future than by going and learning a whole set of new. So now, that's the depressing part. Let's shift to the other thing, which is, okay, but the other side of this coin is that there's a lot of opportunity, right? And I personally believe, which is why I'm investing money like crazy right now, which is that the other side of the coin is that there's going to be an incredible amount, trillions of dollars worth of value that gets created, not all of it accruing to shareholders of Facebook, which sadly I was not. And I think we have a lot of things that allow us as lawyers to find and thrive in that opportunity. But I think the core is, again, that we have to go back a little bit to thinking like our colleagues in the next building, and that we have to think like business students, and that where we see opportunity, we go to it like moths to a flame, and we seek it out, right? There was a student who I was talking to who told me, look, in Silicon Valley there's a simple rule: if it's already at $1 billion in sales, run. Right, and that what we have to do is keep finding that stuff that's new, right? And I think that, but once we're there, we have to be ourselves. We have to think like lawyers, act like lawyers, and do the things that we do well. And we have lots of opportunity to succeed. I also have to say that I had a lot of fun when I was there, and I was responsible. I was finally given responsibility, right? When people said, "Okay, transform the corporate legal department," go ahead. Right? And I learned that it's kind of interesting, right? A lot of people had not really thought about how to do that. And it was fun to be able to have a blank canvas and to go try things, right? I also got the opportunity to work with some of the best and brightest people. And I learned is that in Silicon Valley, the best and brightest follow the equity, right? And so where they see opportunity and equity, that's where they go. And it's really special when you have that moment and you can follow those people and you get to work on the biggest problems with some of the brightest people. For me, as I said, none of this was really foreordained. I was not the poster child of my law firm. Or poster child, maybe in not a positive way, but I'm not the poster child of my law firm. And there are still people there who are wondering, like, what happened, right? And the reality is that, for me, I believe that keeping in mind always this question of what is your vision, right, and what is your ability to go execute on that vision is core to the ability of being able to take advantage of how much opportunity there is. My attitude about risk began to shift when I started asking the right question, right? My first question I asked, and mercifully I got a good answer at Cisco, which was, how much do I earn, right? And quickly it became apparent that that was actually a dumb question. Because for two reasons. First, I was negotiating with one of the greatest negotiators on the planet, who was my boss, who told me, look, I can already tell. You're sold. You're coming here, right? You have ambition. You want to do something big, right? And we don't have anything, so this is going to be great. So the question is, how much of a pay cut are we going to give you, right? And in a series of negotiations to demonstrate my incredible negotiating prowess, we started at 10 and ended up at 15, which I wasn't quite sure how we did that. 15% pay cut. But eventually, I learned that she gave me a dilemma. At the final negotiation point, she sat down and said, okay, this is it. Look, I said, I'm a little worried about my ability to be a sustained economic entity without some cash. So I need a sign-on bonus. And I'd really love more options. And she said, look, okay, we're done. This is your choice. Do you want cash or do you want more options? Cash is king, right? And one of my paralegals used to keep a running ticker of the economic effect of that decision. So every day I'd walk by her desk. She'd say, hey, we're up to 7 figures now. Congratulations, right? Brilliant. But I had a great vacation with my wife. So, and it was my first test of the equity economy, right? And I failed, right? I made the wrong decision. I asked the wrong question, right? And I spent a lot of time saying, okay, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And I spent a lot of time figuring out, it really is about, how do I get more equity in this thing, right? And then since I'm here and devoting my life to it, how do I build equity in myself so that I can put myself in a place where I'm at a much more senior position, right? And that I'm able to actually be more useful to the enterprise, right? And there were two questions that I kept asking myself once a year, right? I would sit down and I'd say, Dan, yes. Am I in the right space, right? Am I in the right industry? As unsexy as switches and routers were, people kept buying them, thank God. And if I'm in the right space, am I in the right company, right? And if so, then I say I have to build equity in these places, right? And for me, that meant I have to invest in myself. I have to constantly, make sure I understand myself, right? And it wasn't just about personal equity, about how much I owned, but it was also about what skills I had. The other technique that I spent a lot of time doing was every so often I would interview myself. And I'd say, what job do I want, okay? CEO, no, we already have one of those. I can't do that. But I'd say, okay, I want to be head of M&A, right? So why would anyone hire me as head of M&A? Well, occasionally I'm funny, right? I can barbecue chicken, right? I mean, what I've seen a lot of M&A deals. I've read a lot of, I've read a lot of merger agreements, and I've proven competent at reading. Okay. But I realized, look, I had a number of gaps that would exist in terms of me, and I said, here are the gaps. How do I fill them, right? I need to demonstrate vision. So what I decided to do was to use some of the stuff that I was doing in running the legal department and running government affairs to show, hey, I have some vision for the company, right? To put my cards in the ring for when the guy who was running M&A was eventually going to move on, right? And so basically every year since then, I would ask myself, and I still do this, what am I trying to do? And then interview myself as if I'm on the other side of the table, right? And if I start laughing, I realize I have a skills gap, right? And what I want to do is go invest in myself and understand where I'm going to go figure out and find those skills so that I can have them, right? When I finally realized, at Cisco, I had 6 years of running M&A, I was in the same room constantly, and at the time it was, should we buy Nortel, right? Which was a Canadian telecom company. And the answer was always no. But the only thing that kept changing is that the people in the room got younger and I was getting older, right? And I realized, okay, this is really, I can't do this anymore, right? Sadly, Nortel waited till after I left to go bankrupt. I wish they'd done it earlier, it would have solved me a lot of problems. But I said, what I really need to do is prepare for a world that's after Cisco. And what I know a lot about is switches and routers, but I don't know a lot about software development. And I walked into, and about how to build software and how to deal with the new world. I walked into John's office and I said, I want to go run a software team, right? And what I think I'm going to go do is I believe, Cisco's future is in data, and that I really want to go run a software team that's focused on data. We're going to acquire some people to help us build and to teach me, but I'm going to become a leader of a software effort. My happiest day was around this time last year. Someone came up and they were describing me as the resident expert on development, on agile development. Right? No mention of the fact that I was in legal, no mention of the fact that I had been in overhead for 15 years. I was the resident expert on Agile. Absolutely I was. But that has allowed me to be relevant, and also, quite frankly, it's what makes me relevant to the entrepreneurs today, right? Is when I talk to brilliant entrepreneurs who are founding companies and starting companies, it's why they want to talk to me, because I've seen all these things and done all these things, and there's no job that they're doing that I haven't done, right? Including managing software engineers, right? And all of those things have put me in a place where not only can I own a significant part of the equity of something, but I can participate in all of this. The other thing, and it's something that I really believe that lawyers are susceptible to, is getting stuck in the silo, right? And that different skills allow you to get out of the silo, right? There was one conundrum I had was I constantly looked at these guys who were getting fired, right? And they were getting fired into different jobs, but they weren't so incompetent that they would get fired from the company. But at the end of the day, what did they end up being? CEO, because they had all the experience. They were the only ones who were engineering, sales, marketing, fabulous, right? Not that it succeeded in any of them, but they were, they became CEO. And I quickly realized, okay, right? One of the things that you want to do, particularly when you're young, is to get as much diverse experience as possible, right? And that diverse experience is really helpful. There was a guy who was a brilliant guy who ran export controls for me, right? And he was the manager of export controls. And I said, you are such a brilliant guy. Please don't get stuck doing this. Don't get stuck being in export controls. I want to take you to something else, and we'll turn you into something and figure out how to turbocharge your career. And he said, but look, there's no one ahead of me. I can be director of export controls. You can be director of export controls. But in 5 years, you're going to call me and you're going to say, I'm bored, I'm unhappy, I'm not learning anything, and you're going to be too expensive to shift into some sort of new position. Come with me, trust me, right? And he said no, and 4 years and a half. I got the phone call. I'm bored in export controls. I don't know what else to do. I've learned everything, right? And I think it's really important, again, this idea that you keep investing in your equity and you're never satisfied to be in a silo, right? It's the risk that I personally faced, right? Which is that as a GC, which was a great position and a lot of fun, but I felt that you stopped learning something at a certain amount of time, and that my personal equity was going to atrophy if I kept doing this, right? And the greatest thing about Cisco, one of the great things, was that they were willing to take that risk on me, and they saw the investment and all the effort I was making to try and rebrand myself. And they let me go and do more, and that, again, has allowed me so much to be able to walk into companies. And today, I'm blessed. I'm on the board of Arista Networks. For those of you who know, Arista is founded by Andy Bechtolsheim, the guy who founded Sun. And sadly, he named it after a record company. So whenever I wear my Arista shirt out in public, I am stopped by people who look like me and are of a certain age and say, I submitted a demo tape in 1976. Fabulous. Can I hear about it? Right. Andy Bechtolsheim at, arista.com. And I've also had the ability to work early with a brilliant but crazy but brilliant team at a company called Tango, which came to me and said, we think we've reinvented video calling. We're doing video calling over the mobile network, right? And we're going to win. We're going to take over the world, right? Anybody using your product? No, don't worry about that, right? But we figured it out, right? And we have a PhD. He's smart. He's figured it out. Fabulous, right? But today they say, literally, I mean, every day I get to work with these guys, and they get to say, what have you seen? Tell me what you've seen. How do we scale this? How do we grow this? What's the problem set? What's our breakpoints? When do we change? What do we do, right? And all that because I got the absolute ability to keep investing in my personal equity, right? Okay, let me close with this, and I want to talk about some of the lessons I have learned, and I want to give about 6 lessons I've learned from working in the equity economy, and things that I wish somebody had told me early. One thing that's really important, and I believe in passionately, is that failure is an option, right? Only when you fail do you actually learn, right? And to name drop a little bit, I was in a great room where Andy Grove, the founder, the leader of Intel, John Doerr, Kleiner Perkins, and John Chambers were in the room. I was T-boy, right? My job, yes, what would you like in your tea, okay? But they're each talking about where they had failed and how it had changed them. And they went through, Chambers talked about at Wang Laboratories, he missed the PC. Okay, whoops. Doerr talked about something he didn't invest in at Kleiner, and Grove said, we screwed up the microprocessor, and which I felt compelled to speak. And I said, well, I think, in the legal department, I may have, John was like, look, until it begins with $1 billion, and I hope it doesn't, you're not allowed to talk. But I quickly realized that the people who were most successful are the ones who fail, right? And in Silicon Valley, oddly, the ones who, quite frankly, are the richest are the ones who fail, because they fail and they sell their companies to others, and those companies do well, right? But failure is an option, and career failure is really important. Learn from it, move, and don't ever think that it marks you, right? I also think, as I've talked about, that you want to prepare yourself to get as much equity as you can, not just because of the money, but because of the opportunity. The more equity you have in an institution, the more say you have over it, right? And so think strategically about your life and about your career, right? And always think about, how do I get more equity? How do I get more, and how do I do more, right? Because it's, when I leave Palo Alto, they put a stamp on you that you have to quote Steve Jobs in some way. I think it's easy for him to have said this, but it's actually true, which is be young and stay foolish, right? And what that means to me a lot is Mike Moritz, who's the leading venture capitalist at Sequoia Capital, CNN had done a show called Black in Silicon Valley. And they asked Moritz, they said, are you racist? And he said, no, but I'm ageist, right? Fabulous, thank you. But the point is that the equity economy is an economy of the young, right? And a lot of things, the one thing that I've told my children, and I tell you, is that when you're young, your opportunity actually may be greater than when you're more experienced. Because when you're more experienced, you have kids, you have a burn rate, you have a mortgage, right? And that burn rate is not useful in the equity economy, right? You can't negotiate the 15% pay cut. Otherwise, you're going to be figuring out, okay, well, who do I trade the 9-year-old to, right? Although I got a good deal. No. And so the thing that was never told to me, but I have learned over time, is those that keep their personal burn rate low see greater opportunities more and more, right? And that your greatest window of opportunity may be when you know less, because that's when people can afford to make the risk in you, right? And so look for that risk earlier. Don't wait till later, right? I believe this more so as I get older, but learn to ask the right questions, both of yourself and of your opportunities, and make sure that you have a plan to deal with the answer, right? If the answer when you ask questions about yourself is that you're perfect, that's the wrong answer, right? You always want to get feedback and understand, you know, how am I doing? What am I saying? What does it matter, right? One of the best pieces of advice that I got was that every 2 years, what you should do is always act like you're in the job that you want to be in, because then someone might actually put you into that job, right? So I used to wander around very confidently, acting as if I was, you know, CEO of the company. Okay, maybe not there. We'll go other places. But the idea is that you should, you know, that you should always know yourself and know what you are and know where your strengths and limitations are, right? And particularly, it's not that you should cure your limitations, right? You never do, right? It's always that you want to invest in your strengths, right? I tell the story a lot, but as a youth, I thought I was going to play in the NBA. Right? I was fairly convinced, because I was this height when I was 12. I was convinced that I was going to be, you know, the Jew in the NBA, right? Oy, pass me the ball, but don't hit me in the nose. I went to basketball camp. I went to actually John Wooden's basketball camp, and there I had a great coach. And that coach told me two things. He said, if you want to succeed in life, you got to hustle, right? Because you are not the fastest dude, so you got to hustle. Good advice. He said, second, there's no elite basketball player in the country who only goes to his right. You have to learn to go to your left. So I spent 1.5 years learning nothing but to go to my left. I learned so much to go to my left that I actually cannot go to my right anymore. I've forgotten my strength, right? And so constantly when dealing with CEOs, I always say, yes, you have weaknesses. Let's figure out how to address the problem, but you don't have to become different. Leverage your strengths. You're here because you're strong, right? You didn't end up in this place because of your weaknesses, right? Go to your right, right? And know what your right is, right? And I also think you have to be ruthless with your brand, right? All of us have a personal brand. And again, one of the things that's remarkable is a lot of what that brand is what we tell people it is, right? And so we should know our brand and be able to communicate it with honesty and integrity, right? The people I hate are the ones who come out and say, well, I'm Brad Pitt, right? Scheinman, you may be many things, but Brad Pitt, don't see it. But if you can communicate with great integrity about who you are and you can represent that brand, right, it's remarkable, right? And so know your brand, own your brand, and be ruthless about making sure you communicate it. And let me just close with this, which is to say that I do believe that we are entering a moment of incredible and unprecedented opportunity, right? And that opportunity is not going to be confined to New York, to Palo Alto, right, and to China, right? That opportunity exists everywhere. And that if you can be passionate and find that passion, you have an opportunity and a skill set that this law school gives you, that you can be wildly successful in that economy, and that you not only can compete, but you can add a tremendous amount of value, and that you can have fun doing it. So anyway, thank you very much for tonight. I'm happy to take any Q&A, and thank you all for listening. Yeah.
Questions from Scheinman?
Question? We should have planted somebody. Can you at least lead off, ask me some question? No. Oh, man. Really? None? Nothing? Thank you. The check is in the mail.
Perhaps you can answer this question. I get asked a lot of times, but I only play like I know the answer.
Yeah.
I know the answer. Lots of students have interest in ultimately going in-house for a variety of reasons.
Yep.
I think you're familiar with those reasons. People in the room as well. What would you prescribe as kind of the career path if somebody's going to go in-house, particularly in the economy you're talking about, which is going to be where the jobs are going to be and where the expansion opportunities are?
Yeah. I think the most important thing is to use your time in the law firm to learn as much as you can, right? And just like everything else, the more you learn from that law firm, the more, if you can be to where you see across the business practice of that law firm, the more valuable you're going to be when you're in that interview as to why someone should hire you, right? I think that you should always build your network, right? And make sure that we were talking today at lunch about the incredible opportunity Duke affords by having small sections and small classes, right? Where you can get to know people. And I think that you will find that opportunities will come from non-traditional places. right? There has been, some of the most interesting phone calls I've gotten have come through my network of contacts as opposed to, in fact, honestly, I've never gotten a good recruiter call in my life, right? The best calls have always come from the network of contacts, right? And the third thing is be interested, right? You would be stunned. I wish people could sit in on the interviews I did. I want to do a reality show about this at some point, right? But it was like, again, I date myself, but the opening scene of The Commitments, where they say we're looking for people to do Soul in Dublin, right? And we'd say we want people who are interested in, in coming in-house, all this stuff. And we get people come and say, like, what do you do? Right? And I don't know, like, why do you want me? I mean, it's like, no. Why do you want to come work for me? Right? So be prepared and again, know what you're doing. One of the things that we've seen has been, so again, if we were sitting in Palo Alto and you and I were to throw rocks, we'd hit someone with the title of CEO right now, right? It's a little bit of a frothy situation, right? But all of those CEOs at some point need a general counsel, right? And so if you could start paying attention and say, okay, which one do I want to work for, and what is my interview pitch to that person? When I'm going up in front of that CEO and I have to tell her, why me, you should know that and have that pitch ready and then have the facts and the substance behind it to be able to say, hey, it's me, right? And so I think in the more traditional departments, there's a lot of people here who can talk about things about a lot better than I, but we found constantly the issue of money became a huge issue, right? The burn rate issue, in that the problem of starting at $175,000 and then having to work in a world where the average engineer is earning $110,000, right? And so going to the engineer and saying, we're special, we're different, right? We produce paper, right? Was never really a spectacular argument, right, for why we deserved a different salary scale, right? But the people who could say, the people who did really well were saying, hey, look, I'm willing to take the 110, but how much are you going to give me in order to take the 110, right? What do I get out of all of this, right? And I'll close with this. My personal favorite conversation was at one point during the bubble, I had someone walk into my office and say, I'm only worth $10 million and it's not enough. And I said, well, we need to drive somewhere and have this conversation in a more normal environment. I can't believe, right? Mercifully, 9 months and the stock price going down to 8 took care of all that. And I think the Facebook General Counsel is probably having that conversation right now. But I think being able to make sure you control your burn rate is absolutely critical in this economy. So, all right, thank you. The unplanted question.
It's an older guy asking a question.
Thank you.
I thought it was very interesting when you talked about your knowledge of skill gaps. Because the older I get, the more I realize I have a lot of.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that you did or would recommend people to know when you're a busy professional?
Right. So, and particularly as you get, a busy professional with wife, kids, the whole deal, right? So first, the first and most important thing is I took Jobs' line literally about stay young, and I always made sure that kept surrounding myself with new and younger people, so that constantly I was at least hearing what the challenges and opportunities were, right? And I try and at least make sure. I mean, we have a weird situation in my house. My son is a guitar player, and if we go over to dinner at someone's house, he'll talk to the parents because he loves the music of the 70s, and I go talk to the kids because I'm listening to that music, right? Which both of us are a little weird. We end up in the, but I've always believed that stay young and stay close, and then once you decide you're interested in something, go deep, right? And it's the thing, I have to find the time and make sure I know what I know, right? And so I'm convinced. Personally, the next big thing in the world is data, right? This whole big data avalanche is coming and what you can do with data and da-da-da-da. So all of a sudden, I find myself talking to people about Hadoop, a data standard. Do I know anything about Hadoop? No, right? But I'm learning, and I'm finding all the smart people about Hadoop, and I'm saying, educate me, I'm dumb, right? They buy the premise, and they spend a lot of time educating me. And they say, here's how Hadoop works. Here's why Hadoop is better than this or that or whatever, right? Here's why this, that, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, I can start to get deep into this world, and I can say, aha, right? Now I understand. And in technology companies, that's really the way it works, is that you find your coaches, and generally they're younger and they're smart, and you say, teach me, right? And I've never been afraid to go do that. In fact, I've learned a lot. And those people I can tell, I know those people who've educated me are like my gods. And then once I know more, I can tell where they're right or wrong or where the debate was. But at least they get me the framework. So, So, okay.
You talked about data and digital. How does that affect sort of the market cities? You said you don't have to go to New York and Palo Alto. You can be in Des Moines and
Yes.
and do almost anything with
Yes.
the digital world. And sort of what does that open up to
So I think
students?
I think that for students, first of all, I think that for the first time, because now Des Moines is on equal footing, right? In the past, Des Moines had a problem in that it didn't have a port or it didn't have the infrastructure to compete with New York or wherever, right? But today, Des Moines has the same bandwidth as everywhere else, right? And it has, not only that, it has a lot of smart people who are now able to look and say, aha, I can compete with anybody, right? I can build an app just as well as five guys somewhere else. Now, and the other thing that's happening is that the venture capital industry, previously there's a great quote that the founder of Sequoia used to have, which is, if I can't bike to it, I won't invest in it, right? That world has changed, right? And now the people in Des Moines are as likely to be able to get funding as anywhere else, right? And the other thing, quite frankly, is there's a huge cost advantage because there's this crazy war for talent that has inflated. It's an inverse curve. The first-year engineers, it's like this, but you can find engineers with 15 years experience who are priced like at a third off, right? So you don't have to deal with that madness, right? And you can find teams. I just saw a great team in Nova Scotia, Canada, right? And the guy said to me, he said, "You may have heard something about Nova Scotians." No, I never have, but give it to me. He said, "We're reputedly lazy." And I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, but my team, we're not lazy." I said, "Okay, I believe it, right? I buy it, right?" And I said, how did you raise capital? He said, "I went to all these Silicon Valley firms, I knocked on the door, and they gave me capital, right? How are you handling recruiting? There's a university right down the street. I go in there and I say, hey, it's me, right? You want to come work for me, right?" And he said, turns out, instead of they don't want to fly to Palo Alto and leave their families, they're quite happy to come work for me, right? And so this opportunity that wouldn't have existed 50 years ago exists, right? And the winners and losers haven't yet been determined, but I know, right, and I can feel that we're going to go through a period where there's going to be a lot of winners that are going to be created in a lot of non-traditional places, right? And you could see, I mean, if you just look at some of where these apps people are from, it's enormously empowering. It's a global business, and it's happening everywhere, right? And I think, again, I think there's just, I see. I mean, I think it's not going to be linear. There's going to be a bubble and there's going to be a problem, right? Okay. But I see that the trend, though, is clear, right? Another dated quote, but it's one I love, which is Dan Quayle said about Eastern Europe, "The trend is irreversible, but that could change," right? And so I believe the trend is irreversible and that it could change. No, but that it is irreversible and that we're going to have opportunity to be able, that we're going to see trillions of dollars worth of wealth created. And not only that, unfortunately, it's also going to be disruptive to the existing economy, right? And I feel that in my bones. I also see what's getting funded, right? And some of it I think is insane, but every sector of the economy, particularly retail, people are attacking, right? I mean, there's this rent the runway where people are trying to do dress rental, right? So that instead of having to to buy a dress, you rent it and return it, right? I mean, everything gets virtualized, Uber and cars and all this stuff, right? So there's nothing that's going to be left unimpacted by this next round. And I think it means the safe thing may not be what people think it is. So. All right, I have taken up more than my allotted time. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate it. I'll be around for questions.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.